Hi there. Today we're going to try to make this KTM 950 run. It's been sitting for 8 years. It was a barn find. I just picked it up. We're going to do a deep dive, so let's jump right in. Okay, so I got the tanks kind of loose and ready to come off, but first I got to drain the fuel. I know it's dark in there, you can't see. But I thought I'd light it off. I thought I'd just see if maybe, this fuel doesn't smell bad, just to see if maybe it'd run. And it does run, but it leaks fuel. And that's running on one cylinder there. That ain't right. And yeah, it's dumping fuel, so it's got to come apart. Yeah, shucks. I just thought, well, maybe I'd luck out and the thing would purr like a kitten, but I kind of knew better. So here we go, diving in. Hey, all right, so I got the carbies off. That was a bugger, oh my gosh. But if you own one of these KTM 950s and you're watching this, you probably already know that. So first order of business, I think, first thing I removed were the chokes. Then the throttle cables. Then you pulled the fuel hose up through here. Had to disconnect this vent. This kind of just popped free. That was decent. Left a little rubber boot on the bottom there. The plug, you have to disconnect the two plugs for the carb heaters and the ground. This takes a 7mm. Then the electrical for the throttle position sensor. That's with the carbs. Yeah, this guy right here. Don't mess with throttle position sensor. You have to recalibrate that. So just leave that on the carbs. Don't mess with that. Unplug it right here. This is your remote idle control. That had to be fed up. Had to pop this grommet out. That had to be fed up through there. So all right, I'm going to take them apart. All right, I got the carbs apart, mostly disassembled. I still need to pull out the fuel screws and the slides. Probably take a look at those. Just clean those up. I did find 2 clogged air jets and 1 clogged pilot. We'll get those cleaned up. And that was leaking fuel. The floats, the float needles, everything looked pretty good there, but they're pretty clean. But we're going to massage those a little bit too. It may be coming from, there's some O-rings where the fuel supply goes in, and that is retained by this piece right here. I may end up having to order those parts. I'm going to hook, once I get this ready to go back together, I'll hook a test bottle to it and let it fill up, and we'll just see if it's leaking before I put them suckers back on, because that's a lot of work. By the way, here's where the jetting is on this bike. Stock air cleaner, stock air box, obviously, and a Q4 slip-on. Fuel screws are 2 turns out. And I wrote it down here. The main 160 from the front cylinder, 165 in the rear. Pilot 42, a starter jet 65, 68. And there's the layout for the air jets. Not sure if that's stock or not, but that's where this bike's at. Okay, so I'm deep in the carb cleaning, and I'll kind of give you some pointers on how I do it. A lot of times I don't like to take the slide out, especially on really old bikes I'm putting back together. Sometimes the diaphragm is still okay, but when it jumps out of where it seals the carburetor, it's hard to get it back in there. Really delicate. I try to not use any carb cleaner on the rubber itself, and I just sprayed some carb cleaner on the rag and just wiped down the slide until it came back clean. Here's how the slide goes together. It goes in this order. The cover, the spring, this dude that just pulls out. There's another little spring hiding down here in the bottom. See that? Don't lose that. And then the needle, mine is on the 4th clip position. I don't know if that's rich or not. Like say, we haven't even run this bike yet. And then there's a little washer that goes underneath there. Sometimes that washer can stick down inside the slide, and you got to make sure that you don't fumble that. For carb cleaner, I like this Berryman stuff. Brake cleaner isn't really up to the task. You need a good carb cleaner. Other tip is because all these jets are all the same size and well, they're not the same size, but they have the same thread diameter and are of similar construction. I made a diagram over here to kind of show where they came out. This is related to the air jets. And then, well, I know where it's obvious to me where the main, the pilot, and the starter jet go. And before you take your fuel screws out, make sure you gently run those in until they bottom out, and reference where you were at as a baseline. For cleaning the jets, you know, here's a pilot also, and one of those was clogged. Is what I use is I have this needle. It's kind of a heavy needle. Let's see if I can get that to focus. But it's like, yeah, focus. It's like hair thin on the end, and it's a heavy needle like for sewing leather or canvas or something. There it is. And I ground that down carefully on a bench grinder, and I've been using that tool for years. It doesn't remove any material out of the jet, but it's rough enough where I ground it, and I ground it lengthwise with the needle, not crossways. So any roughness is, you know, runs that way. So I'm not pulling material out. I'm just removing sediment. And I've actually used, that's my favorite tool. I've used it for years. I used to take a toothpick and sharpen it, but I don't know, one of my buddies, I told him to do that, and he broke the toothpick off his jet, and he had a hard time. Some guys use tip cleaners. Yeah, I don't recommend that because they're like a file. They're designed to remove material, and you don't want to do that. But, you know, particularly if you have jets that are clogged, that's a good indication that you need to scrub all of them, because just the sediment that's in those, even if they're not clogged, if they're taking up 2% of the inside diameter of that jet, well, that's equivalent to one jet size. So you really need to scrub those on the inside, being careful to not remove any material that would alter how much fuel they meter. And, you know, use your carb clean and some compressed air to blow those out, and figure out some way to gently scrub those. The float needle, that guy, the rubber tip that's on the end of that, I just clean that with my fingernail. Again, I don't use carb clean on any of the rubber parts. And in addition to that, I marked the float. The floats are really clean. I'm not going to clean those at all. But I marked it just, you know, in case there's a difference in adjustment, whatever. May as well put it back in the side it came out of. The pin for the float needle, for the float, the pivot pin, if that has any discoloration on it or sediment, use a really, really light Scotch-Brite, like a white or kind of a worn out piece of maroon, you know, a fine that's kind of worn out, and just scrub on that just enough to remove any discoloration, any sediment. And then also I like to put those back in. When I put that back in, I'll put that in with a drop of WD-40 and kind of tickle the float a little bit, just to, you know, give it a fighting chance it doesn't hang up as it's filling for the first time. You know, just show it a little love. The air screw, when you take that out, here's the order of the stack up. If you can see that, there's actually there's a washer there that protects the O-ring from the spring as you put that, as you make adjustments on that. And then the O-ring, again, same thing. Don't use any carb clean on that. If it's got sediment on it for some reason, and they usually don't, but if it has sediment on it, just clean that off with your fingernail or replace it. But that's the order they go in. So typically the screw comes out by itself and it leaves the spring, the washer, and the O-ring in place, and you make yourself a little tool or something. You know, that's a little piece of wire with a little hook on the end. You can draw that out with. Make sure you don't fumble that. A lot of those washers and O-rings have been fumbled, and it's possible that I may have done that myself. Also, these tend to be, I mean, these are your idle, you know, this basically is fine tuning for your pilot jet, and really plays a role in how well your bike idles. And so these get a little sediment on it, and the very tip of that, dude, very tip of that is where the metering occurs. So again, you don't want to be scraping on it with anything. You just take a piece of like super fine Scotch-Brite, either white or worn maroon, and just kind of twirl that, you know, and just, you know, get that to brighten up. Make sure there's no sediment on the tip of that. Yeah, there you go. There's kind of an overview of the things that I do. The next thing is I'm going to take the carburetor body and I'm going to spray out all the orifices, all the passages, spray those from the inside out. One other creator mentioned to, especially where the fuel inlet comes in, where the float needle seats, blow backwards through that. There's a screen in there that can get sediment in there, and you want to blow that back out through the carburetor inlets, fuel inlets. Another little note regarding the float needle. These ridges, that's what rub on the side of the bore for that, the brass bore. If there's any sediment on there, run your fingernail up and down that. Get that off of there too. Hey, so I marked which side of the carburetors the slides came out of. They probably go back in either bore just fine, but I mean, they've been living there. This bike's got 20,000 miles. That's where they're comfortable riding. So why wouldn't you just put them back in the same side of the carburetor? Same with the float needle. You can see I marked that. Not really legible, but that's the one for the front. And I took a little scribe and marked on the carburetor bodies as well, front and rear, just so I know, just to make it easier. I mean, do everything you can to ensure success. Okay, here's another one. Here's something I do. Take some Carb Clean, put on a Q-tip. This is the bore for the float needle. You can really scrub that. You can get in there and scrub that, and it gets right where the tip seats. You get right on the seat. You can even see that the end of the Q-tip takes the shape of the seat. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but you can actually see that screen down through the bottom of the bore. So yeah, definitely blow that out. Side note, when you put these guys back in, sometimes they like to jump out of the groove. Be super certain when you're mating this guy up. Obviously, this little tang right here goes over this orifice right there, but make sure that it's flat. And if you feel like you're crushing down against rubber, you probably need to stop and back up and assure that the edge of this is in its recess. Don't crush that thing. Another thing is, I think this has to be said, is probably never take after your set of carburetors with any type of power tool, like a power driver or anything. At best, you're dealing with fine thread brass parts, and at worst, you know, pot metal carburetor bodies that are pretty much unobtainium at this point. So yeah, probably don't do that. Okay, all the air jets are back in. The 50, the 80, and this one down here, the 40. And both of those were clogged on both carburetors. That's a thing on these, I guess. Okay, I've got all the fuel metering jets back in. Boom, boom, boom. Then the fuel screws gently ran in and then ran back out 2 turns right where I found them. I've got the floats back in and the float needles. And regarding float needle adjustment, I try not to mess with that if I don't have to. They don't change unless someone was in there doinking around with them. And looking at both of them, you know, looking at how they stand proud, they're even. And again, there's no indication that anyone was in there messing with them. So, you know, I don't see any bending on the tabs or anything like that. And so, you know, unless you think you know more than KTM and K-Hen, I just leave those suckers alone. If you go in the forums and whatever, some people may say, oh, there's a little, you know, performance gain or something, maybe a little burble you might be able to tune out by tweaking those a little bit. But, you know, I'm kind of new to this particular bike and I just want to make it a runner. I'm putting it back together the way I found it. Yeah, I decided to go ahead and check the float level because why wouldn't you? And I just got the carburetors on their side and they do kind of lean this way a little bit. And that's how you want it, because you want the float like up against the spring on the needle, but not depressing it, right? So it's there. And you don't need any special tools. I just have well, this is a huge caliper, but it reads in millimeters also. It's a freaking 12-inch caliper. It's huge. But yeah, you work off the end of it. Work off that little dude sticking out there. So, yeah, so 3.5 millimeters or 138 thousandths is how that works out. But just, yeah, or you can, you know, work it out on a little piece of cardboard or something, make yourself a little right angle template, whatever you need to do. So you can see I've got the end of the caliper resting on the gasket mating surface of the float bowl, and everything is 90 degrees to that surface. And you can see it's just right there. So that's how you do it with that end. That little, you probably know if you own one of these, that little nubbin is for checking depth, and that's basically what we're doing here. So yeah, 3.5 millimeters, 138 thousandths, right in there. Make sure your slides return nice and smoothly, and that both sides are about even. I just cleaned the float bowls, and there was some sediment on the float bowl gasket, and they were really hard, like plastic, and I'm trying to not buy those, trying to salvage them suckers, and I think the Carb Clean kind of softened them up a little bit. Hopefully I'm not leaking out of that seal. We'll see when I put fuel in it. So I connected a fuel line to it in a test bottle, and with float bowl covers on and the carburetor's right side up, and it did leak, and it appeared to be coming from those old gaskets on there. Super hard. I thought I might have softened them up with a little Carb Clean, but no. So I'm going to have to come back at it, replace those. But the fuel inlets, elbows, the O-rings on there were fine. Not a drop out of those, so that's good, because I didn't buy those parts. Okay, I got the all balls kit, and I'm putting the new float bowl gasket on there. There's the kit, made in China, but we're going to give her a go, because I had to have these gaskets. But it also came with new float needles and new gaskets or new O-rings for the fuel inlet right there, those swivels right there. New fuel screws and little baby washers and O-rings for that. And pretty much, you know, all the rubber parts you need to go through one of these carburetors. The old gasket was, I mean, look how thin that is. I mean, it's like plastic, it's brittle. So the new one is nice. It does want to jump out of here a little bit, but I took just a tiny little bit of this Yamaha or Honda Bond 4, and with just like a scribe, and carefully just put a little bit in some of the strategic places, in about half a dozen places around. It's still trying to jump out in this corner. You certainly don't want to pinch your new O-ring. So I may put a little more in there and let that set. Just a tiny little film. You don't want to change how the O-ring mates. So you want just enough in there to get it to stay in its groove. Okay, the test bottle's hooked up, has fuel in it, and carbs are good. They're not leaking. So yeah, she's ready to go back together. This is the adjustment for the synchronization between the two carbs. Looks like you should be able to get at it pretty easy through the top of the air box. These two hoses are to put your carb sticks on, your vacuum gauges. They go right to the intakes. This one plugs into the underside of the air box. It's just kind of a blank little plug. And this one just is, on this bike, is just kind of laying there with the screw stuck in the end. But that's kind of handy. So I'm getting ready to put the boots on the cylinder head intakes, and I did notice couple little things. This dude, the collar on that is longer than the collar on that. And I don't know, it hasn't been ground down or anything, but I'm not sure what's going on. The shorter one was on the front cylinder. Well, I can tell that somebody's been in here before. The other thing is this nut is bent, and these threads are a little sluggish coming off. This one's bent a little bit also, but not as bad. Inspect all that going back together. Also, take a look at these little nubbins right here. That's part of the boot. Those are put there so that when you tighten this, it keeps it from pushing around. It keeps it from rotating. It indexes it. So you want to have that in that type of orientation right there. When you put your intake boots on, really spend some time and make sure you got those just so before you push them onto the cylinder heads. Make sure your little nubbins are oriented correctly to your clamp, so your clamp doesn't rotate while you try to tighten those. Come through the side with your driver and make sure that you got a good angle on those dudes. Once you push those on, they're really hard to get back off. In fact, I had one on incorrectly, and I had to put the carburetor back on in order to draw it back off. And you're coming out the right side of the motorcycle with those, by the way. The left side, the throttle wheel is in the way, and the linkage between the two carbs. Make sure you zip tie this in a position so it doesn't interfere with the throttle wheel. It's your forward choke cable. Okay, she's a runner. She's all warmed up. KTM 950 carb sync. You shouldn't have to take the tanks off. Your vacuum lines are generally, this one plugs in the air box. This one's just laying back here. They're routed remotely. I have my smog stuff off. So that's why this one's just kind of hanging there with a screw in it. So you reach up under your bodywork if it's in place and pull these dudes down. And you can see one goes to intake manifold there, one goes to intake manifold there. There they are. Pull those down, connect your vacuum lines. This is where you make the adjustment. Right there, that screw. Connect your vacuum gauges. Have your idle turned up just a little bit. Make sure the engine is up to temp. Make the adjustment. Turn the idle back down. check. Looks good. Yeah, so she runs killer now. I think it's going to be a good bike. Hey, thanks for checking out my video. Please like and subscribe to Krusty Cycle. I got all kinds of motorcycle stuff coming up. Yeah, we're going to finish working this thing out and get her buttoned back up. And there should be a lot more great content on this machine. So, hey, thanks again for watching.